Mr. Bishop, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thanks for having the podcast with me today.
Certainly. Thank you for asking me to participate with you.
Oh, no problem, sir. I love to have you. I love to have you. Okay, go ahead and tell me a little bit about yourself, sir.
Well, my name is Mike Bishop. I'm a public administration coordinator and professor here at Tyler Junior College, and I also teach some criminal justice classes as well. I just recently retired in January of 2022 after serving with the Longview Police Department for 32 and a half years.
Could you probably tell me about your experience at the Longview Police Department? Like, tell me what made you get into being a police officer?
Well, what made me get into being a police officer is prior to my employment with the Longview Police Department. After I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to get into policing, but I wasn't quite 21 years old, which is the minimum age that most states have to become a police officer. So the route that I chose was I enlisted in the United States Air Force.
Why the Air Force?
After looking at the 5 different branches of the military, I just decided on the Air Force because of the career field, which was security police officer. So I went into the security police field in the Air Force, and that's where I got my first 5 years of experience in policing was in the military. After I got out of the military in May of 1989, that's when I began applying for police officer positions, and in July of 1989 is when I got hired by the Longview Police Department.
Was it a good stay at the Air Force? Was it a good stay at the Air Force? Like what? I'm just trying to figure out what is it like for anybody trying to be a police officer. I never thought about going through the Air Force first.
Well, the military was a little bit different. I did it. I did the Air Force route for 2 reasons. One was to get some experience as a police officer, and 2, because I knew I wanted to start pursuing my education. I did that as well when I was in the Air Force. Because the military paid for a lot of the educational benefits if you chose to do that. So by the time I got out of the Air Force, I had obtained my associate's degree in industrial security through the Community College of the Air Force. So those were the 2 main reasons why I went into the military, to start my career that way.
When you first got into the police, when you first got into being a police officer, what was one thing you noticed that was different than what you thought it was going to be?
Well, when I first got hired by the Longview Police Department, the first big notice was being a police officer in the military and being a police officer in the civilian world are 2 different worlds. Because in the military, the laws that you operated under was the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which were the laws that military personnel had to follow. Coming into civilian policing in the state of Texas, now you had to enforce criminal laws that were enacted by the state of Texas. So it was a little bit different from that aspect.
Was it a big shift?
It wasn't too bad of a shift, because everything that I needed to know coming into the civilian world, I learned when I attended the police academy. So that's where they taught you everything, police procedures, state law, traffic law, the Code of Criminal Procedure. That's where you learned all that information, was in the police academy. So by the time I graduated the police academy, I had a good understanding of where we were at as far as the difference between the military and civilian law enforcement.
When someone is going to a police academy, what is something you would give advice to for somebody?
Well, police academies are very structured, and they're very rigorous, and you have to have attention to detail, because you will be given a lot of information in a short period of time. So having that structure, time management, being able to receive the information, understand the information, and then study for the information throughout the course of the police academy is going to be very important.
Right.
Because at the end of the police academy in the state of Texas, you have to take a state exam to become a peace officer that's administered by the state. So nobody knows what questions are going to be on that state exam, and you have to learn the information that is presented to you in the police academy and then be able to sit for the state exam. And you have to pass the state exam with, I believe, a 70 or above to become a licensed police officer.
Do you believe, how long were you at the police academy?
The police academy is 720 hours of classroom and field instruction. So that's roughly what, 4, 8, 12, 16, 18 weeks in the police academy.
Do you think they gave you enough time to learn all the information? Do you think you needed more time?
I think you have enough time, but your learning in the academy has to be a constant process. So what you cover in week 1, you can't forget about in week 15. You have to continually go back and study the material that you've already covered, so that by the time you get to that state exam, you haven't forgotten what you learned in the first couple weeks. So you have to keep going back, review, and move through the curriculum.
So it's continuous learning. So even when week 1 can be different from week 2, so it's not built off of week 1. It's just different information each week.
It's just different information each week. Yeah, that's correct. Because you may be studying the penal code for a couple weeks, and then you may move into the traffic code. Then you move into the code of criminal procedure, and then you have your other field training that you have to do, your firearms training, your pursuit driving.
Sound like that was fun, the pursuit driving.
Yeah. There's a lot of your defensive tactics are included in the academy. So there's a lot of not only book work, but there's a lot of practical things that you have to be able to do as well.
Okay. When you're in the police academy, are you paid while you're in the police academy, or do you have to work outside of the police academy?
It depends. Different agencies do it different ways. I was fortunate when I was in the police academy. I drew a salary from the city. Most agencies are going that way now, and they're using it as a recruiting tool. So that you start out at an entry-level salary while you're through the academy, and then after you get out of the academy, there's a series of steps that you can go through to increase your salary once you're out of the academy.
Okay. Can you tell me about your time in the Longview Police?
It was a good career. I don't think there's anything that I wouldn't change. I think policing is a noble career. I think there's some issues within policing that need to be addressed, and I think we're having those conversations in policing, and I think by the time we get through the issues with police reform, I think the profession is going to come out better and in a stronger position in light of a lot of the issues that we see that are being brought to light about policing, about American policing, and how we police the citizens.
when you were when you were in Longview, was there anything that you noticed? Okay, I have a question. Whenever you're policing, would you, if you see a police officer doing bad, would you say something? Would you kind of help them to do better?
No, I was the kind that if I saw something that wasn't right, I would bring it forward, and I have done that. And certainly, finishing out my career as the police chief, I had to review internal investigations on different types of police misconduct. And I had to make the decision as to whether um, the discipline was appropriate for the circumstances. Sometimes it could be the individual needed additional training. Sometimes they needed to be written up with a reprimand. Sometimes they needed to be suspended, and sometimes, unfortunately, I had to terminate individuals for violating policies and procedures that were put in place to ensure that that you had a police agency that would not violate constitutional rights or step outside the boundaries of established law.
What when you say reprimand? What does that mean?
It just means officially writing somebody up and identifying the bad conduct, and it would be something that would go in their personnel file and it would remain there. Depending on the circumstances and the number of write-ups, a written reprimand is a form of corrective behavior.
Okay.
So we'd issue a reprimand saying, hey, your actions that you took were not correct. You need to learn from this, but at the same time, future violations could lead to further disciplinary actions up to and including termination. So it was a way to maybe on less serious violations try to correct some behavior that was not correct, and hopefully the individual wouldn't repeat those same behaviors in the future.
Okay. Whenever you have those routes, do they follow you to every police station you go to? Like if I would say I was in your police station and I got written up 2 times, hopefully not, but
Yeah.
written up twice, and I went to like Tyler Police, it would follow me there.
Your write-ups will stay with the agency, but where your personnel file will come into light is when you apply with other agencies. They're going to have you sign a liability waiver, releasing liability on the agency that you're working for. And then when they do the background investigation, if they knew you worked for a certain agency, they're going to go to that agency. They're going to give them that liability of release, and then the agency that you used to work for is going to open up your personnel file. So the agency, the new agency that you're going to go to work for, they're going to be able to see everything. Okay. When they do the background investigation.
Okay.
So yes, your reprimands or your disciplinary action stays with the agency you worked at, but the new agency that you're applying for is going to see all that when they do their background investigation, and then they're going to make the determination as to whether or not they want to hire you based off of what they've learned during your background investigation.
Okay. I've never heard somebody refer to a police station as an agency. I never knew they were called agencies.
Oh, it's just a difference in terminology. That's the word that I use. Police department, police agency.
Oh, that's fine. So you have your own. Okay. Whenever you were in Longview, did you want to be the police chief?
When I started as a patrol officer, my goal was never really to become a police chief. And I get asked that question a lot. I think what happened over the years was I was very fortunate and had a lot of different opportunities to do a lot of different things within the police department. Um, and as I learned and gained that experience, I decided to participate in the promotional opportunities that came up. So, after 6 or 7 years as a patrol officer, I tested for sergeant. Had to do that a couple times. Didn't get it the first time. I don't think I made it the second time, but I made it the third time.
Is it like a test?
It's a series of tests. It can be a written exam, an assessment center um, that tests your different supervision skills. And then usually there's some type of internal board within the police department where they take a look at your personnel folder to see if there's any write-ups in there, your performance evaluations. And all of those are graded, and then they average a cumulative score and provide a list. And usually the highest scored person gets promoted based on the number of positions that you have. So over time, participating in the promotional process to sergeant, which a sergeant is a first line supervisor, so you're working with the officers, you're still out there in the field and supervising individuals.
Like ride-alongs? Like you ride with them, or you do?
Well, you can. Most of the time, no.
Okay.
But usually, occasionally, you might hop in and ride with an officer that you supervise, just so you can observe their performance and make notations in your supervisor's notebook about their performance. So when it comes time for their performance evaluation, you have the documentation to support the good or the bad, or room for improvement. So sometimes you can do that. Each time you promote up, after I got promoted to sergeant, I stayed there for a number of years and then promoted to lieutenant. And with each promotion comes more increased responsibility.
Okay.
Because as a supervisor, you might be on day shift and you might be over 8 officers. Okay, but as a lieutenant, you move up. Now you have more responsibility, so you're over a whole division.
Right.
So you might have anywhere from 20 to 25 employees.
Are you still in the field? Or
Huh?
are you still in the field? You more in the office?
It depends on which position you're in within the agency. So if you're in field operations, if you're a lieutenant and you're a shift commander and you're over a shift in the field, then yeah, you're still kind of in the field. So you're still taking care of everything that happens out in the field. But now as a lieutenant, you're over 4 sergeants and probably about 35 to 40 officers.
Was it it was like a big transition? Like, how did you adjust to the new roles?
It just takes time. Hopefully you have a mentor, somebody that's already in a higher rank that kind of guides you, and you seek outside police training, supervision courses, management courses, how to supervise people, how to manage people. And as a lieutenant, you have a lot of administrative duties too, because now you got to do all the scheduling and leave time, vacation time. You have to make sure that you have enough people to work the streets every day. So all of that kind of comes into play. After being a lieutenant for a number of years, there was some other promotions that took place to the rank of police chief and assistant chief. So I was ultimately promoted to an assistant chief, where I served in that position for roughly about 4 years before I was promoted to police chief. So when you're assistant chief, now you're have even more responsibilities and you're over probably half of the agency size, which was roughly about 125 people. Um,
It's a lot of people, sir.
yeah, so now you have all those management priorities with managing people, but now your responsibilities have increased because now you're having to deal with bigger issues within the police department when it comes to preparing annual budgets, making sure that you have enough money to operate with a year, dealing with technology issues, dealing with software programs, dealing with records management, all of those big picture issues now come into play as far as the assistant chief's role in managing the police department.
Could it get stressful?
At times it can, yeah. Just the very nature of time constraints, because a lot of things are done with time constraints, and by the time you reach that level of management, things have to be done in a timely manner. You just can't go to your city manager and say, well, I need more time, or you have those time constraints, and things need to get done. And then, of course, after serving as assistant chief for 4 years, I was ultimately promoted to police chief in August of 2015.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And served in that position for 6.5 years.
Is that the highest position you can get?
It is within the police department. Now, as the police chief, you're over. In my situation, I was now over and managed roughly about 250 people in the department. We had 175 sworn officer positions, and then the rest were civilian personnel that worked in records, administrative staff, property room, and then our dispatch center, our 911 operators. So it was roughly about 250 employees that I was over within the department.
Is it what you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, I kind of knew what I was getting into because of my experience as an assistant chief. As an assistant chief, you work real close with the police chief, whoever that is at the time. So I saw what the current chief had to deal with, so I got a lot of exposure to that. And he kind of mentored me too, through succession planning, is helping that next individual to step in and take over when you leave, which was one of the things that I did as chief. Is the assistant chief that I had, I kind of took him under my wings and groomed him and made sure that he was aware of everything that was happening and why it was happening, and included him also in the major projects and planning of the police department.
I don't know how someone manages to manage that many people.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge to do that, because you have all these other administrative duties that you have to do as well, in conjunction with that. Keeping your policies and procedures updated, preparing your annual budget, not only preparing your budget, but after the budget is prepared, is throughout the year making sure you don't spend too much money. So our annual budget in the police department with everything included was roughly about $24 million.
For 1 year.
24 million is what it costs to run our whole police agency.
I didn't know.
Huh?
I didn't know it was that much. So
Yeah.
that would boil down from your salary to next person's salary down to the police officers.
That comes everything from what we call labor and benefits, which is the salary and the benefits, to the copy paper that you need to buy, to the dog food that you need to buy, to the vet bills for the K9 unit. It includes everything.
I got a question. How does someone get a police dog?
The police K9 program is pretty competitive because we have a lot of individuals that want to do that. Within our department, the way if we had an opening for that position, we would post the opening, and then officers could apply, and we'd have an internal board, and they would interview for that. And then a selection would be made because being a K9 officer is a long-term commitment. Because once you purchase a K9 dog and put that with an individual, you just can't swap out K9 handlers.
Right.
So that's a 7, 8, 9 year commitment that an officer needs to make to be a K9 officer. Because usually when you buy the dogs, you buy them already trained.
Right.
So by that time, they're about a year and a half, 2 years old. And then you usually can use the dog in the field for about 7 to 8 years.
Correct.
If the dog doesn't develop any
Health issues.
Medical issues. Yeah.
Okay. I have a question. What about people being able to take their units home?
Take-home units has become a very popular community policing effort. Some agencies do offer take-home units. Some agencies don't. We did not have enough cars for every officer to have a take-home unit. But if you were in a specialty position where a car was assigned to you, then we allowed you to drive that unit home as a home storage unit. So, your specialty positions might be a police area representative in community policing, a detective in CID, a traffic officer. Those are primarily the specialty positions that had take-home units.
Okay. My question. Whenever you first started policing to now, what were some of the major changes you noticed over time?
Over time, probably the biggest change for me is technology. Because in 1989, when I started in policing, there was 3 things that you pretty much needed to make sure that you had was your weapon, your flashlight, and a good writing pen. Because we didn't have the technology. We still had to handwrite our reports. We had the radios in the car, and we had the portable radios. But everything was pretty much logged down by hand when I first started. Over the years, we would write our reports and turn them into records, and then records would type them into the database. Over the years, probably around the early 90s, is when we saw the first mobile data terminal, MDTs that we called them. And basically you could receive information on, call notes, the location, the time of the call, where you needed to go. You could write a few notes in there. And then as that technology progressed, then you could get to where you could write your reports and have them go automatically into your records management system. Following the MDTs, we saw the in-car cameras come about, where the cameras were mounted in the cars. So that was a new piece of technology. Several years after that, the mobile data terminals got upgraded to mobile data computers now, where you actually had a laptop computer in your car that had all the information that you needed pertaining to a particular call. And now you can write your reports and submit everything, do everything through your mobile data computer. And then, of course, probably around 2015, I think, is when we launched our body camera program, where we started purchasing body cameras for the officers to be utilized when they were outside the vehicle, answering calls.
Was that a big transition? I'm sorry.
It was, yeah, because two reasons. One, because you were using technology, and two, because the officers were not used to it. It was new to the officers. So they had to get used to it too. And understanding that everything that they do is now recorded in some form or fashion, either through the in-car camera or through the body camera when they leave the vehicle. So that was a big transition there. So looking back, I think technology, not only with what we had in the police cars, but also with your computer programs and your crime statistical software, the ability to pull information, put into your records management system, and pull that out and be able to do predictive analysis on the crimes that have already occurred, and then try to predict when and where they're going to occur in the future. So the technology that's there today within the police vehicles and your software programs are very robust and have enhanced policing from the ability to solve crime from that standpoint has gotten very good over the years.
That's good. I got two more questions for you.
Okay.
Whenever you were determining how to when you were determining to patrol streets, how would you determine how many officers for each? So how big was your section? Was it the all Longview, or was it just certain parts?
No, what we did in Longview was we had the city limits.
Okay.
And we had them broken down into 6 geographical areas that we call police beats.
Mm-hmm.
And before we broke them down, we'd look at, or once we broke them down into patrol beats, then we looked at the calls for service in each one of those beats. Okay. And what we had to do, or what we made sure of, is that all 6 beats had a very similar call load. Mm. So we were within plus or minus 3%, because you didn't want officers working in one area that were busy all night long, and officers working in another area that had nothing to do.
Right.
So if you can balance out your call load within your patrol beats, you knew the calls for service were generally the same. Mm-hmm. And then you could assign the number of officers that you needed to those beats to handle the calls. So then not only did you look at it by beats, but now you had to look at it by days of the week and then time of the day.
Oh, goodness.
Because there are different days that are busier than others. Mm-hmm. And there are different times that are busier than other times as well. So you kind of had to take all of that into consideration, and there's different models that you can use. one of the standards that we go by is on our priority one calls, which are emergency type responses, is we wanted to be able to respond to a priority one call within 5 minutes.
Okay.
And for years we have consistently met that mark. That's a national uh, standard that agencies strive to meet when it comes to emergency type responses.
Okay. My last question. Well, I got two more questions. This one's come to my head. What's one of the strangest calls you had as a police officer?
That's kind of hard to answer because all the calls are really different. Um, you hear people use the word routine call a lot, but in all actuality, I've never had two calls that have actually been the same. So there's been a lot of different types of calls that stand out. Each one of them is different, but some of them are funny and make you giggle, and then again some of them are very serious.
Right.
So you kind of have a whole lot of different types of calls that stir your emotions at different times.
How do you keep your emotions in check as a police officer? I feel like there's some moments that can get out of hand, but you got to keep your composure the entire time.
That's sometimes hard to do.
I can understand that.
But you have to have the ability to be able to do that. When you're responding to a situation that's out of control, you have to keep your emotions in check so that you can think properly and be able to de-escalate the situation or get it back under control. So if you're going to a scene that's out of control and you get there and you start acting out of control, it's just gonna escalate things into a situation that's not gonna be good. So you have to have that level head. You have to be that voice of reason, and you have to remain calm, because individuals that are in a crisis situation are calling the police because it's a situation that they can't handle or they don't have control over.
Right.
So they're expecting you to be able to get there and handle the situation.
Right.
So that's a very good point. It's very important to having the ability to do that. And one of the ways that you can do that is by having good communications.
Right.
Which is one of the things that worries me about our younger generation today, is because of the technology that's out there. We sometimes lose that one-on-one interaction and having that ability to communicate. So having good communication skills is very important in policing.
Okay. My final question is, what is life after retirement?
What is it like after retirement? It was hard for me to adjust after I retired. Of course, when I retired, I was offered a full-time position here teaching. So it took me probably about a good 6 months to adjust of not being actually in policing.
Okay.
Because when you've done it for so long, that's your
routine.
And I made the decision that after 32 and a half years, I felt that was the right time for me to step back and go into this education role, and hopefully be able to take my 32 and a half years of experience and pass that on to the students here in the classroom, because I think that's important too. You can read everything in a book, but you don't really understand everything you read in the book and how it relates to policing unless you hear some of those stories,
Correct.
it starts to build a bigger picture on what policing is and should be.
Okay.
So, but I've enjoyed it. I think my wife's enjoyed it too because my phone don't ring at 2:00 in the morning
And you
anymore.
have to get up at 2 in the morning to go
Yeah.
do something.
Yeah.
For sure, sir. I'm very happy you were able to have this podcast with me. I believe I learned a lot. I learned about agency. I learned about. I'm still curious about K9 units. I had to ask you about it. I feel like I've learned a lot, sir.
Well, thank you for asking me. But you know, policing is a noble career. I know policing is American policing is under a lot of scrutiny right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when we get through this difficult patch, I think policing is going to come out. It's going to be better. It's going to be stronger. We're going to have better trained officers, and we're going to have better policies and procedures put in place to deal with those individuals that don't want to follow the rules and regulations.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.